Hello, welcome to Personal Identity and Ethics. This is the introductory lecture. We are going to talk about identity. Specifically, we're going to talk about two understandings of identity that philosophers use because we want to keep them distinct and understand the difference between these two understandings of identity. And these two ideas of identity are numerical identity and qualitative identity. So we'll start with numerical identity. And we have kind of the technical definition of numerical identity up on the screen. So numerical identity is the relation that holds between a thing and itself, and not between a thing and anything else. So if you have two things, x and y, and you say x is equal to y, and that's numerical identity, then what you mean is x and y are the same thing. They're not different things. They're equal to each other in the numerical identity sense. We call this numerical identity because you can imagine if you're counting things and you give like a number to each thing, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. When you're counting things, each thing gets its own number. So if I'm counting cats and I have 1 cat, 2 cats, 3 cats, 4 cats, 5 cats, that's 5 different cats. If x and y are the same thing, and I'm counting things, x and y are cats, and they are the same cat, and I'm counting cats, I'm not going to give a separate number to x and y. So if I have 2 other cats, I count 1, 2, and then I get to x, I count 3, and then I get to y, but y is just x again, so I don't go 4 when I get to y. So numerical identity is for counting how many different things that you have. That's a very different kind of understanding of identity than what we call qualitative identity. So qualitative identity is another way of thinking about identity. So qualitative identity is about having sharing different qualities in common or sharing different properties in common. And so things are more qualitative identical when they share more properties in common, and they're less qualitative identical to each other when they share fewer properties in common. So for instance, here are two medicine pills. So there's one over here and one over here. Qualitatively, they are very, very similar. Qualitatively, they're sort of very identical because they're the same size, they're the same shape, they're the same color, they're the same weight, they're the same texture. They sort of share basically all their qualities. Now, qualitatively, they're not 100% identical. They do have some distinct qualities. So this one is over here, this one is over here. They're in different locations in space. One of them was probably created before the other, maybe just by 1 second or something, but still they were created at different times, things like that. We could make them even more qualitatively different. I could paint one of them orange and then they would share fewer qualities and so on and so forth. So these things are very qualitatively similar, but not 100%. And then these pills and a cat are very qualitatively different. They're different sizes, different shapes, different colors. They're still a little similar. They're both made out of matter. They're both physical. You can touch them, but very little qualitative identity between one of these pills and a cat. So that's the two basic ideas of identity we'll be working with. And now let's say a few things about them. First, they're separate from each other. You can be qualitatively very, very similar, but numerically distinct. So these pills, remember, are basically qualitatively identical. But how many pills do I have? Well, 1, 2. There's 2 pills. So they can't be numerically identical to each other. They're not the same pill. These 2 pills are not the same pill. They're 2 different pills. So you can have qualitative identity without numerical identity. And you can also have numerical identity without having qualitative identity. Now, how would that work? Well, the easiest example is also slightly controversial for this class because it involves personal identity. But assume for the moment that you are the same person right now as you were when you were born, numerically speaking. So if I'm counting how many people are there, and we say, well, there's you when you were a 1-day-old baby, and there's you right now, how many people is that? Well, that's just one person the whole time at different stages of their life. So there we have numerical identity. I'm counting how many people we have, and it's just one. Do we have qualitative identity? No. You right now and you when you were a baby are very qualitatively different in 100, 1,000 different ways. So there you can have numerical identity and not qualitative. Notice numerical identity is a yes or no. So x is or is not numerically identical to y. It doesn't come in degrees or anything. You can't be more numerically identical to something or less numerically identical to something. It's just yes or no. Qualitative identity does come in degrees. You can be more or less qualitatively identical to somebody else or to something else or two things. Can be more or less qualitatively identical. So that's it for these two kinds of identity. This course is about personal identity, so who are you? What are you? And we're mostly going to be talking about numerical identity. So when you see philosophers talking about identity in this class, most of the time it's numerical identity. And you must keep that in mind, because if you think they're talking about qualitative identity and they're not, if they're talking about numerical identity, you will not understand what they are saying. So keep this distinction in mind. This will recur in some of the reading quizzes, I think. It'll show up in some of the readings, but we want this right there, right at the beginning. So that's why this has been the only subject of the introductory lecture.